Hey everyone, good Sunday morning to all of you, and welcome to the Buddhism and Contemplation Practices Group. We have a meditation and discussion today about the Tao Te Ching, and my hope is that we'll have a little bit of meditation to start with for about 10 minutes. And after that, I'd like to hear from some of you about some of the passages in the Tao Te Ching that resonate with you. And I can tell you a little bit about some of the passages that resonate with me, the importance of the Tao Te Ching in not only my life, but in my clinical practice and my work with patients. And we could have a discussion about how to integrate the Tao Te Ching into our work. And I'll have some resources for you, and maybe we'll do a couple of other things as well if time allows. So without further ado, to start this meditation, first thing I'd like to ask you is if you can remember back to a long time ago, roughly about a minute and a half ago, and reflect on whether or not you were thinking about your breathing, whether or not you were focusing on whether you were doing it right, how long your inhalations were, how long your exhalations were, whether it was comfortable, whether you had any sort of apprehension or discomfort at all. My guess is if you're like most people, you probably weren't aware of your breathing and you were doing it perfectly fine. Okay. Well, in many meditative practices, the idea is to focus on your breathing, to focus on the breath. And that serves a lot of different purposes. The most ostensible purpose is helping people to build awareness because our breath is our connection with the outside world. Breath comes in, it goes out, comes in, goes out. It's one of these things that we can control if we want to, but we can just leave it alone and it will be fine and we'll survive perfectly well, the way that we do when we sleep for 8 hours each night or when we're not conscious of our breathing. But once we turn our awareness to our breathing, all of a sudden, we want to start controlling it. We want to make our breaths deeper. We want to make them more in rhythm. And we start controlling it, and then our breath gets disjointed. Well, this is a metaphor for a lot of things that we'll talk about later in the Tao Te Ching. But what I'd like to do in this opening meditation is give us 10 minutes, and I'll put a timer on the screen. And I want you to focus on your breathing without trying to control it. Just let your body naturally breathe. Watch the breaths. Notice the changes that may occur with your breathing, but don't try to do anything with it. And you're going to discover it's harder than you think to just watch it without trying to control it. So what I'm going to do here is share my screen. 1 second. Okay. Share. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start this. Ready? Go. Okay. Okay. So I don't know how many of you are like me in this regard, but I was breathing perfectly rhythmically, perfectly fluidly before the meditation. And once the meditation started and I was bringing my awareness to it, all of a sudden, I was getting shortness of breath. I was trying to time my inhalation and exhalation to make it more smooth, but the more I did to make it more smooth, the more disjointed it got. And ironically, when my mind would wander off for, I don't know, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and I'd bring my awareness back to my breathing, it was calm and fluid. So when I stopped being aware of my breathing, all of a sudden it kind of settled back down again. And then once I became aware of my breathing, all of a sudden it was getting choppier and choppier. And I think there are lessons here in many respects for our clinical work, for our personal lives, for our relationships, for how we interact with the world. All of you are familiar, I'm sure, with Al-Anon, the support group for people in recovery. Good friend of mine is goes to Al-Anon meetings, and he told me once about one of the favorite sayings in Al-Anon for helping out your family members in recovery. Don't just do something, sit there. Right? And that sounds bizarre to us in the West, because in the West, from a Western mind, from a Western way of thinking, the way that you improve things is to do something. But very often, when we do things, when we jump to do things, we do them without really knowing what should be changed. We do what's most immediate or most available to us. We haven't gotten clarity on the situation. And when we intervene before we've really thought and reflected, or in this case, listened to another person, the changes that we seek to make to help them actually do more harm than good. And for a lot of people who have problems with alcohol and substances, their family members have tried to intervene with the best of intentions, usually, but their interventions have actually made things worse, have actually created more disruption for them in their lives. And so the advice to people in Al-Anon is don't just do something, sit there, listening. Just your presence in the space with another person very often is enough to help them, to make them feel better. It's a very underrated aspect of the work that we do. But I work with people who are lay therapists. Essentially, everybody is a lay therapist to someone in their life. Most people don't have training in psychology, but everybody is a lay therapist to people in their lives. Their family members, their friends, their students. And a lot of the things that we do as psychologists, we can easily train other lay people to do. I would say about 50% of the things that we do as psychologists and social workers, we can train other people to do. Listening, validating, helping them to identify the things that are within their control and focusing on those things as opposed to the things outside of their control. Now, the other 50% involves things that we were trained to do, ways to provide either analysis or interventions that reframe person's life and problems for them. But so much of what we do can be boiled down to listening and bringing awareness, greater awareness to the situation. But what gets in the way? Whether it's in our clinical work or in our personal lives or even in our public lives, what gets in the way? Well, in the Tao Te Ching, one of the things that is repeated often is the ego. The ego gets in the way. We have a need to change things the way we want to change them, whether it's with a family member, whether it's with our community, whether it's with the world at large. We always want to change things in a way that is comfortable for us or makes us happy, our ego. So the Tao would instruct us that one of the ways to remedy this situation is to kind of sit with yourself and to bring greater awareness to your own needs and what you're projecting out into the world. Taoism has a history in China for about 2,500 years, at least formally. Depending on who you talk to, the insights and the precepts of the Tao Te Ching are far older than Lao Tzu and the actual codification of the Tao Te Ching in some sort of book form. But Lao Tzu is often given credit, and Lao Tzu may not even be a single person or a real person, but nominally, Lao Tzu is given credit about 2,500 years ago with codifying these insights that were likely thousands of years older than even him and passing them on to the next generation. Hundreds of years later, after the establishment of the Tao Te Ching and it being distributed and innervating the culture in China, Bodhidharma from India, who was a Buddhist, brought Buddhism to China. And when that happened, Buddhism and Taoism merged, or I often say had a love child, and that love child is called Zen. And what Zen essentially does is takes the precepts and the insights of the Tao Te Ching, and it combines it with the practice of mindfulness meditation from Buddhism. And it puts those two things together with the understanding that as you bring greater mindful awareness to yourself, to the world, you can understand the ways of nature better. And when you understand the ways of the natural world better, you can more easily work with them instead of fighting against them. So much in our lives and in our patients' lives and in our clinical work and in our interactions with the world, we fight against nature because we don't see or understand the subtle underlying patterns below the things that we see above the surface. It takes not only awareness, but trained set of eyes to be able to see these hidden deeper things below the surface that really give rise to the more salient things that we interact with on a daily basis. And so one or two quick things before I throw it to all of you. There's a saying in Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture, you've heard it in Buddhism, you've heard it in Taoism, you've heard it in general in Eastern culture, that a finger pointing at the moon shouldn't be confused with the moon itself. That the best the teacher can do is point the finger in the direction of the moon. but you are the one who has to actually look at the moon and experience the moon yourself. I can't bestow upon you my understanding of the Tao or Taoism or the Tao Te Ching. The best that I can do is point a finger in the direction of where to look to start to be able to be aware and notice some of these things yourself. And the Tao Te Ching itself offers some clues. There's a passage in the Tao: to find the Tao, follow Tao, right? So how do you follow something that you haven't found yet, right? That in and of itself is a riddle. And some of the Tao Te Ching is written in kind of poetic riddles. I think what's really meant here is that when you make a commitment to following the Tao, you'll take in some lessons from the Tao Te Ching itself, from other teachers who might have more experience with it. And all of these things will be pointing fingers in different directions for you. And if you can bring your awareness to those things and gradually refine your awareness, you're going to notice and become aware of things that were previously outside of your consciousness. And when you see them, you're going to notice them more. It's sort of like when you hear a word for the first time and you didn't know what it means, and then you know what it means, and then all of a sudden you start hearing it more and you start seeing it everywhere. Well, it's the same way with the Tao. When you start seeing it in small places and you bring greater awareness to it, you're going to start noticing it in many, many other areas. And then you're going to, without even realizing, in the same way that when you're not thinking about your breathing, you're breathing perfectly calmly and in rhythm, without realizing it, as you become more and more attuned and aware to the ways of nature, to the ways of the world, you're going to start syncing with them, jibing with them, without even being aware that you're doing it. And it's going to become a cyclical process. So that is the end of my introduction on the Tao Te Ching. Some of you have sent passages that have resonated with each of you. And if you feel comfortable sharing those and talking a little bit about why those passages resonated and how you see them operating in your life, I would be happy to hear from it, from all of you on those things, and we can have a great discussion.
John, would you like to, just before we speak, would you like to share the two that
Sure.
folks who couldn't be here today shared with us?
Sure. Sure. Okay, I'll share screen. Second. Oops, sorry. All right. Share, share, share. Where did it go? Here it is. Okay. Okay, so Jai was the first to email you, and the passage here that most resonated with him. From stillness, the most enduring actions will be born. Within its mystery, the clearest answers will arise. Although it may appear empty, it will never be exhausted. Being unconcerned with honor and disgrace, you will bring no misfortune upon yourself. Stop chasing contentment, and it will come to you. Okay. So that was Jai. And I don't know if any of you have identified either this passage or any of the lines within this passage as lines that resonated with you as well. But since Jai is not here to, I guess, talk about why this resonated with him, um, I guess I will say that, like many passages of the Tao, this passage speaks to the interaction between opposites. And we can talk later about the yin and the yang as being sort of the primal series of opposites. But here, from stillness, the most enduring actions will be born. Um, you'll see this pattern of opposites in many things in the world. Yin and yang, yin and yang come to represent the way that we sort of have filtered that into our understanding is the feminine principle yin, the masculine principle yang, but it's more involved than that. Yin as being the principle of the dark, the moon, yang as being the principle of the light and the sun, yin as being the principle of receding, yang as being the principle of advancing, and so on and so forth. That there's this interplay of opposites. Okay. And then Barbara, who couldn't make it, said that the passage that most spoke to her,
Mhm.
those who are unafraid to say they don't know become wise. Those who insist they know never learn. Those who pay attention to their weakness gain strength. Those who neglect their strength become weak. Wisdom and strength come from the courage to see things as they are. Okay, there's a lot here. Once again, Barbara's not here to explain why this resonated with her. In the first part of the passage, you have this interplay of opposites again. But there's also this discussion of humility, being able to say that you don't know something, humility. If you can do that, then you can grow beyond yourself. That's not only a good principle in psychotherapy, but I would say on a spiritual level, um, the ability to grow comes from the acknowledgement that there's something that you don't know. And to me, though, the most important line in this passage is actually the last one. Wisdom and strength come from the courage to see things as they are, including yourself. You know, we all probably remember the famous line from Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, right? You want the truth, you can't handle the truth, right? Um, from a psychodynamic perspective, and I practice psychodynamically, as you know, we believe that we have defense mechanisms, some conscious, some unconscious. And these defense mechanisms protect us. Unfortunately, sometimes they run amok, and sometimes we overuse them, and then our defense mechanisms become symptoms or problems unto themselves. But at their origin, at their core, our defense mechanisms protect us from various truths that we might not be able to handle. Our psyche is not always as strong as we would like it to be. And if we were constantly bombarded without protection, without defense, with all of the horrors of the world, with all of the distressing things about life, about ourselves, about death, all of these things, if we were constantly bombarded with these things all of the time, we would disintegrate psychologically. And so we need some filters. We need some protections. And these filters, these protections are our defense mechanisms. But if all we do is block things out, then we are never seeing the world and never seeing ourselves as they are. And so there's an art to letting a little bit of the truth in. Not so much that it overwhelms you, but enough so that you can continue to see things as they are. You can continue to see the world as it is with greater honesty. You can continue to see yourself as you are with greater honesty. You can continue to see your relationships with greater honesty. And so that's what, I believe this passage and particularly this last line is talking about. And it takes courage because it's scary. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Jai. I'll throw it out to Any of you?
Pull mine up on my phone here. You know, in the two things that you just shared, there's and in some of these other passages, this idea of not acceptance because we like something that's uncomfortable, but this idea of acceptance and allowing and being all right with, even when it's really, really difficult. I think I'm learning that regardless of our training and our orientation, that it's kind of like you said before, it's one of these great wisdom lessons that if you come back to this very simple idea, and this was the passage that I chose, simplicity, patience, compassion, these three are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and thoughts, you return to the source of being. Patience with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate toward yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world. And I go back to the days of sitting in Albert Ellis's office with his smelly bologna sandwich and learning, okay, let's see, A, B, C's. All right, you got the A. All right, now what's the B? Make sure I got the B right. Is it rational or is it irrational? And then let's see, if it's rational, I have to dispute it. So you have all our techniques, right? In whatever school we were trained in. And yet, really, even in that language, it's doing the same thing. It's like, what's real out there? That's what you come back to. If it's crazy, whether it's in the world or in your head, maybe we gotta kind of take a look at that. But there's this I don't know, resonance of everything down to these really simple ideas. The moon.
Thank you, Tony. So that was from a different translation than this one, and I think the Tao Te Ching has been translated more than any other book except for the Bible. So, always running into new translations, but the passage that you read, I know I can identify where it is in the translation that I distributed. Um, but it's fun to hear the same thing, a different way. I'm most familiar with this translation from Benjamin Hoff, who also wrote the Tao of Pooh and the Day of Piglet. But it's fun to hear the same passage in a different translation. So, but thank you. That's not only a good passage to highlight, but you're bringing up how it resonates in your personal life, uh, is important. Thank you. Hi, Cheryl. Oh, your microphone's off. There you go.
How's that? Yeah. Hi, John. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here.
Good to see you.
That was beautiful, Tony. Thank you. And Barbara's too was so clear, and I could resonate with both of those. On the note of translation, um, I have two passages that stay with me quite a lot. And I read John one version that you provided for us by Hoff that was interesting. And then I went to Stephen Mitchell and read the one that I usually read, and it's phrased differently and I resonate differently, but they're
Uh-huh.
both really, saying similar things. So I thought I would read, and perhaps we can all just listen to the words and see what words do for us and the space between words and the rhythm of words. Um, and then I'll say a little more maybe. I find it very hard to talk about the Tao because the words never really seem, it's like the finger pointing at the moon, to even talk about it. So this was verse 11 from, was it Hoff? Uh, yeah, Benjamin Hoff's book. Wood forms the wheel's hub. The space within makes it useful. Clay shapes the picture. The space within makes it useful. Walls define the room. Windows, doors, and the space within makes it useful. Appearance comes from what is there. Value comes from what is not. Filled with ego is not the way. So, yeah. And so, in another translation, this one is Stephen Mitchell. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center hole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. So I always, the yin and yang, the paradoxes of, you know, what's valuable and what we see, what the appearance is it strikes me. The wheel and the spokes and the hub is an image that I often have when it comes up. I don't know, it comes up at different times. But in terms of thinking about it in therapy and our relationships um, and life, it's very easy to get distracted by appearances, which are the form of things. So in therapy, it might be, the way the room is set up,
Mhm.
container. It might be uh, even the words spoken, the language, that words are important. I think the way we say things matter. Um, but they're like the finger pointing at the moon. It's not necessarily the most important thing. And then the space we create within the therapy room and between two people is kind of the relational aspect and the space in between the people, which we can't see. And it's almost ineffable,
Mhm.
but we feel it, we know it, we sense it. Um, a lot comes from that. And that's been, John, you said this earlier, it's not it's been a little bit in the background in terms of its therapy, that
Mhm.
whole space. It comes to the forefront now more and more how important it is. Um, but I love to remember that, to remember the spaces in between the form.
Not just you,
So,
Cheryl, Dave Matthews too.
yes, yeah.
The space between. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, exactly. As we were talking about earlier with the Al-Anon, don't just do something, sit there, right? Uh, our words in this case can be analogous to the form, the substance, and we're giving people something. But our listening is more ineffable. The space between becomes more salient when we're listening. And, sometimes we might not think that we're doing a lot, by just listening. But as you said earlier, just talking about holding space and this concept of holding space, right? Uh, right? A pitcher holds space. A room holds space. The wheel with the spokes holds space, and that space, um, it's powerful in a way that we can't really understand sometimes. And so if we can't understand it, the tendency is to kind of poo-poo it and minimize it, especially again, from a Western mind perspective. We're much more trained to think about the more salient things and action and activity and things like that rather than passivity. Thank you, Cheryl. And that was good. I appreciated the contrast with the Stephen Mitchell translation.
One of my moms this week, her son is 22, and he's having a really tough time. And she's a sweet lady, but she's a go-getter. He has to get up, he has to have a routine, he has to go to the gym. She said, Dr. Pencil, I think he needs more techniques, like it's like, okay, thank you for techniques.
We need such balance between things, We can easy to get caught up.
So, Tony's anecdote and your recommendation bring up a passage, another favorite passage of mine. I feel like they're all favorite. Every time I say this is my favorite passage,
Yes.
I mention about 70 different passages, but it's only about 81 passages long. So, for the mother that you're working with, Tony, I think about this passage: stir muddy water and it will stay cloudy. Leave it alone and it will become clear. So very often our life is kind of like muddy water. And again, we think that we have to kind of stir it up to kind of get rid of the clouds, get rid of whatever is impeding with our ability to see. But the remedy here is exactly the opposite. Have a little patience, as you were talking about before in the passage that you quoted. Let the dust settle. Right. But that's hard, especially when your inner world is in such turmoil. You just want to do. It's so much harder to sit when your inner world is in turmoil. But you're just stirring up the muddy water, that's already there when you're acting without knowing how you should be acting, or where you should be acting. Hey, Christine.
And thinking about what all of you are saying, it just seems that people, like thinking about the space in between, we don't always see that something's happening even if we can't see it. So it's not about conscious action, but about being in the space and trusting that motion is still there. So like the space in between, I was thinking automatically of like the Bardo states or Barzaks in Islam, that the energy that's connecting what we think of as separate things or separate states of consciousness or separate states of mind are really always merging and integrated. And we only see the parts. We don't see the motion or the energy that is really continually bringing everything together. It's like the ebb and the flow of the yin and yang. So that's the part about like kind of getting comfortable in the moment,
Right.
the way it is. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, well, apropos of that, right? Here's a little handkerchief. You didn't see the gravity that pushed this down, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't there.
Exactly. Exactly. And what you did before with the meditation gave me a totally different perspective on number 8, which is my favorite Tao Te Ching passage, if I have to pick one, because I was realizing as I was naturally breathing and I was more gently focusing on the breathing versus more assertively focusing on the breathing. And that's kind of what number 8 is really all about when you think about it. Just gently being.
Mm.
Should I read number 8?
Go ahead, sure. Yeah, and tell us specifically, yeah. I mean, I know you've kind of given us a little bit of a preview of why it resonates with you, but read
Yes.
it and then, if there's more for you to explain.
And this is from the Stephen Mitchell translation too, because I tend to lean
Okay.
towards Stephen Mitchell. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao. And in dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. So I think, again, the first part, which I tend not to think about usually as much as the middle section, resonated with the meditation. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to.
Mm.
It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao.
Mm.
So even thinking about how we value action often more so than stillness, silence, pure being. And it really is, as we learn through practice, more beneficial to learn how to let go of that control, like you were saying right from the beginning, and that the external, which is often illusion
Mhm.
or not exactly truly seeing into the nature of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everything seemed to come together naturally today. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. That was
Yeah.
wonderful. And it was also good to kind of hear that same passage that I'm, very familiar with, but from Stephen Mitchell's translation.
And it's something I've used throughout my life. I have actually that passage on a mug that I used to keep on my desk when I worked in the technology field when things were crazy. I had it as my focus, my mantra right in front of me every day
Well,
to keep myself in that state of consciousness as much as I could. We're so easily pulled into the other, so it's kind of like a dance.
I'm glad to hear there are, closet Taoists out there.
Yes.
You know.
It was really my first introduction more formally to Eastern religion when I was about 20 years old,
Mhm.
40 years ago. Yeah, I knew a little bit about Buddhism in my teens, and then someone at where I worked introduced me to Tao Te Ching, the Jane English translation, and it just completely transformed my life. Yeah, so I love Taoism.
I'm thinking maybe we'll leave some Tao quotes at the dinner table for the big family Christmas dinner this year. Maybe we'll intercept some of that tension.
Well, here. So Tony, you didn't know that you were cueing me, but I will I will tell you my most recent project. So, you for Christmas you could put on the Yule log, or I'll show you my most recent project. Let me just do a share screen here, and for anyone who's interested, or maybe I'll also email it as well. So I put this together. I was at Robert Moses a few weeks ago, and the sun was setting. It was just a perfect sunset. Um, and so I did some recording of the waves, and I thought this would be a great backdrop for the Tao Te Ching. And so I went on to Adobe Premiere Pro, and I put it all together, and I put all of the passages of the Tao Te Ching as captions in this video. And the entire Tao Te Ching is about all of the captions are completed after about 90 minutes. And then the video repeats for 11 hours.
Oh
The
my
reason why I have it repeating
goodness.
for 11 hours is because I like going to sleep to the sound of ocean waves.
Mhm.
So I put this on my YouTube, TV in the background, and I go to sleep to this. But for the moments that I'm awake, I'm reading, the passages of the Tao. And so, I can send the link to
I
those of
love
you.
that.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I wanted to say a couple things. So, I hold on one second. I think I lost the screen. Here we go. I think I had the Jane English version also. I think I picked it up from like used at like a bookstore when I was in grad school, and I really like loved it. And it's actually in my office right now. But one of the a couple of things have always stuck out for me. Um, and I think that maybe it is passage 71 in the one, John, that you posted,
Mhm.
but in my version it says something kind of to the effect of those that know don't say, those that say don't know. I've always liked that because to me, like that's just continually come up in life, like in just observing life and observing sometimes like the way that people conduct themselves, and all of the language,
Yeah.
right? Like there's this sense of peace that happens when like you know something,
Hmm.
but you don't have to always say what you know. Um, so that's one thing. Like passage 30 and the one that you had, resistance follows force.
Hmm.
For me, that's really salient in doing therapy in the sense that, the more I'm forcing things, the more resistance I'm feeling often,
Mm.
and to remind myself of that. Um, and then 23, passage 23, to find peace, learn to lose.
Mm.
Very, very important, for me and with a lot of the work that I do with folks, because I think that like when for a lot of the folks that I work with who struggle with OCD and a lot of just really uh, um, I would say difficult relationships with their mind.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of it is learning to lose their ideas of what they thought treatment was going to look like, or what they thought that they could do
Mm.
with their mind. Um, so I, will often, get people to come in and, they'll say in the beginning, how do I make this uncomfortable thought go away? How do I make this feeling go away? Um, and so I think it's important to kind of learn to not be attached to ideas that aren't like serving you in that way.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and I also like a lot of the use of just in general nature, and like water, I think is really important too. Kind of like Melissa was pointing out in the chat. Um, I think water is a great example of how to learn to be flexible. Water takes the shape of its container. Water is soft, and yet, a drop of water continually creates a valley, or carves a valley, I should say. So there's so many great what looks like paradox, right, on the surface, but or it's very dialectical, but it's just so useful, and it connects in so many ways that I do work with people, and and I love it for it. And I've actually recommended this to a few of my clients to to read and take a look at this and see what sticks out for them. Um, and I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Um, I think that's it. I think what you were saying earlier, John, that really resonates with me in the sense that, I feel like a lot of what I'm trying to do in therapy is teach people how to stop fighting their own nature.
Hmm.
Like people will say like, "Oh, I want to get rid of these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings." I'm like, that's like trying to cut your arm off or something, right? That
Hmm.
doesn't make sense as part of who you are. So
That's right.
teaching people to stop fighting their own nature, I think is important.
Yeah, Dan, you said so many things that I could speak to. I mean, I could talk for hours on just on the things that you brought up yourself. I'll try to keep this brief. Um, we get ideas fixed in our mind, and then we become attached to them, and then we fight to defend them, even when the results in our life or the data that we collect don't support those ideas. And it becomes more about winning and losing than it becomes about either living in alignment with the Tao or nature, or even just living a peaceful life, right? And so, then the passage that you brought up about if you want peace, learn to lose, you know, that's a tough one for a lot of people to swallow, right? Would you, rather have peace but take the L, as the kids say, or would you rather continually be in conflict and uh, holding out this hope that you might win, even if the data doesn't necessarily support, or your results don't necessarily support your actions or your perspective on things. There are lots of ways that you could interpret that, both within oneself, within one's family, within one's relationships, but then, culturally within the world at large. Yeah. So, like I said, I'll try to keep my comments brief on that, but the passages that you brought up have application far reaching, but also, within oneself as well. So I'm looking at the time. We're just about an hour, you know, into the meeting, an hour past. I guess we can start wrapping things up, but if anybody else has any comments.
Just to thank you, John. This is the first meeting we're recording, and the beauty of this is, I know Barbara will say to me tomorrow morning, so how was John's presentation? It's like, okay, so this is really going to be helpful, and we can archive these. So thank you for allowing us to do this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I don't know. This has nothing to do with the passages. This is my question. In Taoism, is there any concept of synchronicity? Do they address that?
Synchronicity all right. So tell me about in what context of synchronicity are you talking about?
Okay, as far as there are no coincidences.
Yeah, so I think reading in between the lines, so the passage that comes to mind here, the wise see the action and its foundation, the foolish only see the changes. And so, the Tao, or in this case, Lao Tzu, is speaking to, well, what does a wise person do? A wise person not only sees what's happening on the surface, but has had an awareness, a continual, perpetual, ongoing awareness of all of the different changes that have led to this one visible change on the surface. And so, my guess is that the Tao's perspective on synchronicity is that it's similar to a Hindu concept of karma and cause and effect, that there is cause and effect, but those interactions are likely so subtle that they're outside of your awareness. However, you can bring yourself to a greater awareness of increasingly subtle changes and factors that may lead to things that look like synchronicity by meditation, by studying nature, and so on and so forth. So I guess that would be the best way I could address that.
Okay. Because I was thinking with some of these passages, the idea, if you're sitting still, then you may notice the synchronicity. If you're in movement all the time, you're not going to notice it.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of the beautiful day out there. Happy holidays, and we'll meet again probably in March, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.